After World War II, U.S. productivity was said to be 8 times greater than that of Japan, which was ravaged by depression and inflation.
The Toyota situation in the post-war period back in the early 50s, they really had nothing in terms of resources. It was a resource-poor country. They had no opportunity to waste. Any materials they had to somehow use.
In 1950, E.G. Toyoda, then a young Japanese engineer hoping to rebuild his family's business, spent 3 months at the Rouge Complex, the most efficient car manufacturing facility in the world. Unlike many manufacturers at that time, Henry Ford was unafraid to share the unprecedented scale of his assembly line techniques with other industrialists.
Ford's assembly line worked great when you had high volume and low variety, hopefully no variety, just one. But Toyota's situation was different.
At that time, Toyota Motor Company was making 1,000 cars a month, while the Rouge was making 1,000 cars a day. And that wasn't Toyota's only problem.
Here they are making 1,000 cars per month. And all those, they had to make all kinds of cars. They had to make trucks, big cars, big cars, little cars, limousines, fire engines, you name it. They had to make everything for the Japanese market.
It's necessity that compels the Japanese to redefine the responsibilities of labor in a system that is starved for capital and is only serving very low volumes of demand.
Unlike the highly mechanized assembly lines developed in Detroit, Toyota built their assembly lines around their primary resource, which was labor.
And to do that, they realized the most flexible thing in the entire operation are people. Not machines, not anything else, it's people.
The Japanese never went as far down this road towards making the worker merely a cog in the machine as we did. They were actually using their workers' mind power, and we had forgotten about that.
In what was considered a fundamental change in the assembly line technique, Toyota reorganized the work, reduced the waste, and let the workers define their responsibilities in a process called lean manufacturing.
Every job that you see on a Toyota assembly line has been slowly and steadily improved and fine-tuned over the years by every operator who's done those jobs. Toyota managed to involve the workers, to engage the workers, and to give them jobs that actually provide more fulfillment on the assembly line.
Not only were workers required to define and improve their jobs, they were given a variety of jobs to perform.
They do low-end maintenance. They do low-end housekeeping. That means that you have much less support staff in the factory. You have fewer material handlers, you have fewer janitors, you have fewer maintenance personnel, you have fewer inspectors.
Toyota said the operators, the plant floor is in charge of quality. If you have a problem, you stop the line right now.
With that, every worker on the assembly line became an inspector. Quality and productivity increased because assemblers were able to make more parts right the first time.
The productivity tends to be higher in a lean production plant because you are obligating workers to take on tasks which previously would have been carried out by indirect support staff.
Toyota also did away with certain specialists on the assembly line, like die changers. A die is a hard piece of metal in the exact shape sheet metal assumes after pounding. Toyota developed a simple die change technique on rollers that allowed workers to change dies in 2 to 3 hours instead of the 2 or 3 weeks it took at American auto plants.
They didn't know exactly what number of different products they were going to be making every day, so they had to be prepared to make those every single day.
The Toyota assembly line required that its workers be skilled, motivated, and innovative, because once production was established, the workers were responsible for continued improvement, a process they call Kaizen.
You would remove 10% of the workers, 10% of the time, 10% of the resources that backed up that process, and force the remaining workers to figure out how to now get that job done with 90% of what they had before. And so that would be Kaizen. That would be the continuous improvement element of it. Once they had reestablished a certain balance, then you take out 10% again. And you continually ratchet downward the resources available. That is what makes it lean, because you have only the bare minimum necessary to get the job done, and you keep pressing it downward to see what you can achieve in the way of maximum efficiency in terms of productivity.
By the 70s, Toyota's assembly lines were well suited to capitalize on the changing demands of American consumers for smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. A severe shortage of oil caught American automakers with millions of larger gas-guzzling models on their assembly lines.
There were a lot of people that knew that there were serious problems in the way we were building cars here in this country for a long time. It's quite natural the way that developed. There was a huge market. The system that Ford came up with worked very, very well. As long as people were making money and everything was selling, there was no problem.
Ironically, Detroit's initial reaction to the oil crisis in the late 70s was one of arrogance and stubborn allegiance to the mechanized mass production assembly lines they'd created. Unlike Roosevelt Ford, who worked as a skilled laborer, and his sons who acquired skills through trade school, Rose Ford, who started at Ford in 1978, was typical of the unskilled workers, whose job depended on surviving the increasing pace of the American assembly lines.
To be on your feet 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, was a completely new experience for me.
Like a lot of automotive assembly line workers in the late 70s, Rose was determined to survive. At 39, she was assigned to the frame plant. Characteristic of the American automotive assembly lines at the time, the frame plant stressed quantity over quality.
I could get very upset sometimes when I could see that the quality of the steel, the things that we were producing, weren't really quality, and I knew they were going to be rejected.
I had no idea exactly what she was going through until I came to the Rouge complex and I was hired on by Ford.
Sometimes at night I would wake up and it would feel like my hands were the size of a watermelon, and I'd have to open my eyes to look at my hands. Your body isn't made to work at that speed. It just isn't. No part of your body.
And I took a tour of every plant in the complex, and when I got to the frame plant, my eyes welled up with tears to think my mother actually performed this work. I couldn't do it.
You have to be strong to be able to do that. So your mind has to be strong. So I'm really proud that I'm still sane.
What they eventually found was that the application of these principles to the moving assembly line, which required extreme mechanization, went too far and pushed the human element in the production process to the extremes, and people rebelled against that.
In 1980, Japan surpassed America in auto production, and Detroit reluctantly conceded. Toyota's lean assembly line method proved to be an innovative and efficient production technique. By 1989, the Japanese were making cars in half the time and with half as many defects as those made in the United States. For the second time in the 20th century, the automobile industry changed our basic ideas of how we make things. Henry Ford's mass production gave way to Toyota's lean production, an assembly line method that ultimately shifted the balance of automotive trade around the world. Coming up,